We good, Luke?
Mr. Prince, do you have any additional questions of Mr. Klein?
I do not.
Mr. Orlando, do you have any questions, Mr.
Yes,
Klein?
I do, thank you. Mr. Klein, who is Christopher, I think it's Potojoy?
Chris Potterjoy is an engineer in my office who assists with the reviews of these plans.
And you noted earlier, so he was a participant in developing the reports that we've seen? And
Yes.
And you noted that you did not review the inland letters. Do you know whether or not Mr. Potojoy reviewed them?
I did not direct him to. I don't believe so.
I didn't ask you whether you directed him. I asked you whether you know whether he reviewed them.
I don't believe so, no.
Do you know who Brian Keaveney is?
Brian Keaveney? Yes.
Who is Brian Keaveney?
Brian Keaveney's a traffic engineer for Pannoni.
Does he work, I think Pannoni has a couple offices, don't they?
He works in our King of Prussia office.
Is that the office you work in?
I run the Westchester office.
Okay. Are you aware of the fact that Mr. Keaveney did reviews of this project in earlier years?
I am not aware of that, no.
You indicated in your question or your responses that you raised issues about porous pavement and that there was a reduction in the porous pavement. Can you please turn to the plan and show me where this reduction in porous pavement?
I can try.
Thank you.
So I have sheet 7 of 34, drawing number 21.00. And on this plan, just to make sure I have this correct, there is a hatched area on the parking lot between the building and Horseshoe Pike. There are two separate hatched areas that are indicated as porous paving. My recollection is the size of these, we'll call them squares, 2 squares. The size of these squares has changed since the submission we looked at first.
In what way have they changed, sir?
In square footage dimensions,
In what amounts?
I don't have that information off the top of my head.
Well, do you have it in any, whether it's on your head or not, do you have anywhere else? Now, how do we know what the reduction is in terms of an evaluation of the suitability of the plan?
The plans speak for themselves and the amount that it was reduced between each plan.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. You're the one that said that they've been reduced. There's nothing on the plan that shows that reduction. So can you look at something else and tell us what the amount of the reduction is?
Let me just check my letter real quick and just see if I note that in there. I don't think I did, but I can check. No, I don't have that number handy. I'd have to dig pretty deep and take some time to find that number.
But you're absolutely certain that there's been a reduction.
That's my recollection.
Yes, I do. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Did you clarify?
1,000 square feet.
Turn to November 2nd letter. I think it's your B22.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, Mark pointed out.
I was looking at the other comment.
Zoning?
Yeah, so
Thank you, sir.
would you like me to clarify that then?
Yes.
So yeah, I apologize. I was looking at number 7, but really number 1's the one that deals with that. Of my November 2nd letter, we note the applicant has reduced the amount of pervious pavement by 5,847 square feet.
Thank you. And the area that you were just showing on sheet 7 of 34, the parking lot area, would you, again, I'm looking at the plan. If you can see it from there, fine. If not, come on over. But that's in the main parking lot area, am I correct?
Correct.
And would you say that that's, well, let me withdraw that. I believe there's other porous paving areas shown, correct?
Yes, from this angle, I'm looking at the other hatching from here, and I can see the other area of porous paving as well. I apologize.
So, to the east of the proposed building, there's also some pervious
Correct,
covered.
correct.
And the area to the east, which is, let's call it the second area that we were just talking about.
Sure.
That's pretty close to the stores, or the proposed stores, right?
Yes.
So you wouldn't call that reserve or overflow parking, would you?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay, and you wouldn't call the first area that we were just talking about reserve or overflow parking, would you, Mr. Klein?
Not necessarily.
No, not necessarily. What do you call it? Is it reserve?
No, that's not a reserved parking area.
Is it overflow parking?
Overflow might be considered overflow by some people.
No, by you, sir.
I don't know
What
that.
do you consider this?
I would not consider it overflow parking.
Now, you indicated that a maintenance agreement would be required for the porous paving. Do you know what maintenance is required for porous paving?
Generally, but not to say specifically, there's multiple ways to do that, including vacuum vehicles, using certain materials on it for winter maintenance, things of that nature.
I believe in your B22, yes, sir, in B22, would you please turn to page 4?
You're referring to my November 2nd letter, correct?
Yes, sir. And I believe it's item 18.
Yes.
Is that still an outstanding item as far as you know?
Yes.
And the section to which that refers, is the zoning ordinance still over there in front of you, Mr. Flynn?
It is.
Can you look at 79B2, please, of the zoning ordinance?
$79, $399.79 B2, B2. Yes, I have that here.
You have it in front of you?
Yes.
You've already acknowledged that the proposed landscape improvements do not conform with these sections, so then it gives instructions to the applicant, which says, which in the judgment of the Board of Supervisors achieve comparable results or which render the guidelines unnecessary or inappropriate. Now, in terms of, as the township engineer, in terms of making recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, and you've noted the amount of the deficiencies, and to its credit, last time, I think you were here, Mr. Thacker noted it's a lot of trees missing. So what proposal could be made here to, again, quoting from the section, achieve comparable results or render the guidelines unnecessary or inappropriate, in your view as the township engineer?
Well, I mean, I think it's a very comprehensively designed landscape plan. There's adequate buffering, screening, perimeter plantings. There was a previous attempt to add some landscaping to the center of the parking islands, and that was the crux of this comment, or one of the comments in the letter. We've gone back and forth on that issue. Some additional parking some additional landscaping in the parking lot would not be a bad thing. Beyond that, there's not really a lot of other opportunities for landscaping on this site.
And whether or not there are opportunities for landscape, well, no, strike that. Why aren't there a lot of opportunities for landscaping on this site?
A combination of factors of the proposed landscaping, existing landscaping, and then the various site improvements, including stormwater management, et cetera.
And the size of the buildings as a plan now, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Now, I think, this was referred to in one of your paragraphs. I don't have the paragraph, but the zoning ordinance section is 399-106B.
Can you speak up? I couldn't hear you there.
I'm sorry?
I couldn't hear that section.
Oh, I'm sorry. 399-106B. I know you referred to it in your report, but unfortunately, I didn't note that in my note here.
If I may, I believe between comments, maybe, this comment, comment 6 perhaps, for the sake of keeping things moving.
Oh, I'm sorry, we've already covered that. I apologize. I don't think I have any other questions for Mr. Klein. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. Let's go right to the section that we were just at, Nate, 399-106. B1. In Mr. Orlando's questioning, he asked you whether the areas where the porous paving was proposed were either reserve or overflow parking areas. And you said not necessarily, correct?
No, that's not what he ended up saying. He said, no, they weren't.
Okay.
And he said it very directly after he tried with the not necessarily.
This is cross-examination.
Gene,
Let
really.
him ask his question. If you have an objection, state your objection.
I just did.
It's overruled.
I would like you to look carefully with the ordinance with me. Parking spaces shall have a dust-free, all-weather surface. This requirement shall be met by paving unless otherwise approved by the Board of Supervisors. Now, this next sentence says, pervious surfaces such as porous paving, concrete lattice block, or gravel may be substituted if approved by the board, comma, right? Is that the way it's read?
Yes.
And the next two letters are EG, which means for example,
Correct.
correct? For reserve or overflow parking. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
This section does not limit porous paving to reserve or overflow areas, does it?
I would agree with that, yes.
Okay, let's go to the next item. Let's go, Gene was asking you about the landscape plan. I would like you to go to item 25, document 25, which is the Planning Commission's minutes of November 7th, 2018.
Not
With
20,
me?
not 25.
Not 25.
Am I-
26.
My 25 is the fire
Oh,
company,
I'm
Mark.
sorry, 26.
26,
I missed
got
the tab, I apologize. Just find out exactly where I want to. So, yeah, I got it. So, go over to page 6, right in the middle of the page. This was the Planning Commission's action. Motion to recommend approval, etc., subject to the following conditions and recommendations. You with me?
Yes.
Let's go over to the next page. Could you read number 6?
Number 6 on page 7 says, recommend approval of the buffering, screening, and landscape plan as a plan that achieves results comparable to the minimum planting guidelines set forth in zoning ordinance section 399-79B.
I have no more questions for Mr. Klein.
Mr. Winters, do you have any questions for Mr. Klein?
Did we go over section 399-86C regarding my question back a little before Christmas?
What was the number?
399-86C. When I emailed and
Yeah.
you guys were going to provide.
And I did take, and I apologize, I lost track of that one over the holidays, but I did take a look at it in advance of the hearing today, because I knew you were curious about that. So it was section, let's see, 399-86C. Maybe I'll read it, just for the sake of reading it.
The section? you
The
mean?
section?
Okay.
Yeah. That Jason's referring to. It says, for any use authorized under the terms of this chapter, stormwater shall be managed in compliance with Chapter 345, Stormwater Management. Emphasis shall be on retention and infiltration of stormwater on site unless this is deemed by the township to be clearly impractical, or inappropriate in relation to site conditions. So that was the section you had sent over. So I did take a quick look at that. Collected my thoughts a little bit on that. Obviously, I think that first sentence is really just dealing with compliance with the Chapter 345, which they've done subject to all our various comments, the waivers, et cetera. The second portion of that states, an emphasis on retention infiltration. Again, the applicant's got multiple rain gardens, bioretention, porous pavements. Again, subject to our reviews, DEP permitting. Again, I think it conforms to that. The last, and I think this maybe gets to your point, Jason, if I read the transcripts correctly, is kind of that word site. And, we've interpreted it to be, the site being the entire project, the road network, the adjacent property with the basin on it, as well as the giant site. I think the definition, as I look at that, clarifies that. Section 317 is the definitions. It says site is defined as the total area of land in the township where any proposed regulated activity as defined in this chapter is planned, conducted, or maintained, or that is otherwise impacted by the regulated activity. So I do think that, the intent of this plan meets that section of the code pretty clearly based on the parameters of the site as well as the stormwater code. Again, subject to caveat being waivers, outstanding comments, getting the necessary permits from the DEP would be the caveats I would apply to that.
So it's okay for the stormwater to be ran across to the culvert, to North Cutlersville Road and everything else?
I don't see any issue with that per the code, in my opinion. And I'll defer to Kristen if she thinks there's anything else from a legal perspective, but from my engineering perspective, I think it's conforming.
Okay, that's what I was asking for,
Yep.
399.
I had one question, Mr. Klein. There was some discussion about the issue in the stormwater code dealing with altering the flow. Is there, as a result of this plan, is there any alteration in the flow on adjacent properties?
No, I mean, the water is being directed around the properties to the culvert on Guthriesville.
Objection has been asked and answered. He said there was in his direct
Yeah,
testimony.
well, since I'm in charge of objections, your objection's overruled. How do you like that?
I didn't realize you were intervening in that fashion since all the
well,
other objections were
well-
addressed by your solicitor.
Well, some of them were objected by Mr. Scribner, and in his absence, I'm the vice chair, so I rule on the objections. My question is, when you interpret that section of our ordinance, is it your understanding that that pertains to getting permission if there's an impact on downstream properties?
Yeah, typically if there's a negative impact, correct.
It doesn't matter what he believes. He is not a lawyer, can interpret a legal section, which
gotta
was
be
previously...
You ask him
Excuse
for
me, Mr.
interpretations all day long.
Which was previously the objection which you upheld.
Mr.
And
Prince,
in any event, the ordinance speaks for itself.
Mr.
Good.
Prince, you asked him several times to interpret ordinance sections. That's what he does as a township engineer. So if the-
doesn't interpret them.
Yes, he
All
does.
right, we're not discussing, Mr. Prince, discussion is over, it's overruled.
I thought we weren't going to lose tempers.
You've got a good job, do a good job of pushing it. Mr. Klein, will you answer the question, please?
Yes, again, our interpretation is typically if there's a negative impact on the downstream property owner is where you would approach the property owner for some sort of permission. Stormwater goes through every site. There's no site that's self-contained from a stormwater perspective. That does not exist. In my 18 years, I've never interpreted the way that Mr. Prince has provided us this evening, or this afternoon. That's the first time I've seen it interpreted in that manner.
Do you, in your review of this plan, do you see any of those negative impacts that would require permission from adjacent property owners?
I do not know.
Thank you.
Do you, am I asking my last question?
Go ahead.
Do you review the hop permit for post-project stormwater management and?
I have not as of this time. I believe they're still going through the PennDOT HOP process.
I didn't
He
hear.
was saying go ahead, you want to repeat it?
If
Or?
our engineer reviews, if the township engineer reviews I guess your applicant, the hop permit, for the post-construction stormwater management?
I think that's a non sequitur.
Well, the question, if I may, I think the question is, do we review the HOP permit? And the short answer is typically no. That's PennDOT's permit that they issue.
But part of that review is a stormwater review.
PennDOT would include stormwater as part of their review. What we would do as a township is there may be a post-construction stormwater plan that the township may be required to maintain. And what would happen is, and similar is happening currently with the Applecross project that I'm behind on, is we would come up with some sort of agreement that would put the operation and maintenance back on the applicant in some fashion, whether it be by cost or fee, which is what we're doing currently at the intersection of 322 with the Applecross project. And I get a little bit more involved later in the game at that part of it.
Because I know.
Because I can't, I'm sorry, Jason, because I can't dictate PennDOT what they do from a stormwater perspective.
That's what I was
Yep.
wondering, because I know of the previous hearing, Shirag said that the stormwater from the rain gardens, the parking lot, so forth, is going through the property to the culvert to North Guthersville Road, which is ultimately going to the creek, which goes under Bondsville.
Yes.
And I know PennDOT was concerned with additional flooding in that area, I believe, from Al Frederick.
Al Federico on behalf of PennDOT possibly. I'm not aware of anything specifically, Jason. Again, I'm not sure, again, as part of PennDOT's HOP review process, if they had any specific questions, they would provide those, and the applicant would be required to address them.
Okay.
But again, a lot of times too, they would turn to the township and say, do they meet your stormwater code as a municipality? That's the question we'll get asked by DEP, the Conservation District as well.
Well, that's what they did, and our roadmaster was the one that answered their response, and he's not an engineer, that's why I didn't know if it was passed on to you, or,
I have not been asked that question as of yet.
okay.
If I could help for 1 second, what PennDOT has done for about the last 8 or 9 years, if a developer puts a stormwater pipe in the right-of-way, in the PennDOT right-of-way, they came up with this interpretation that it's the municipality's responsibility to maintain that stormwater pipe.
That's right.
But what happens, particularly in a shopping center such as this, we would enter into an agreement with the township where the owner of the shopping center would be responsible for that.
For the upkeep.
That
and whatnot.
does not happen here because the stormwater, Chirag, the stormwater goes away from 322, so there's no new pipes there. It's gone into the culverts, et cetera, and it's going underneath, continues to go underneath Guthriesville. Well,
It's not trying to be
I don't
maintained.
believe there's any PennDOT piping involvement in this plan.
Okay.
Yeah, again, I haven't been too involved in the HOP aspect, so I'm not all that up to speed on that.
Unfortunately, I know much more than I wish I did.
Mr. Prince, do you have any additional questions of Mr. Klein? Mr. Orlando?
Yes, sir.
All right, I think you're dismissed then.
Thank you. Appreciate it, everybody.
Hey, I note that Mr. Scribner is no longer here, and I thought we were going to end at 2. I don't see any problem with completing with Mr. Klein since he was here for most of
Well,
that
I think
testimony.
we're here for some additional time. We're scheduled today, so do you have any additional witnesses, Mr. Prince?
I do, Mr. Fisher. Mr. Fisher, no. problem breaking your own.
Mr. Prince, I have to talk to my client about anything that occurs. Well, I'm not sure you're accurately stating our conversation, which is why I'm trying to stop you.
I haven't finished it, so how can you say that?
Because you came up to me at the break of the hearing and told me what we said, and it was not accurate.
All right, so what is your point? Mr. Prince, what's your point?
Compare these things. Well, if I had called and let her know yesterday that I was at the doctor's, she implied you would have continued the hearing. I said, no, I did not want to do that. I wanted to get as much done as possible for the benefit of everyone, including the township. I then suggested we skip lunch and break early. And Mr. Schreiber said that he wanted to leave at 2. And that was the end of the discussion.
And the rest of the-
When we finished with Mr. Heinrich, when we finished with Mr. Klein, having skipped lunch, except for 20-minute break, then I get told, sorry, but we now have to proceed because the client desires it. I don't think that is proper. I don't think it is respectful. And frankly, what I asked for was not unreasonable. It was not within my control. I assure you, the last thing in the world I wanted to do yesterday afternoon at 2:30 was spend my time with the doctor or find out that I had a chest infection. Now, he didn't want me here at all, and I've endeavored to be cooperative. Then the answer I get was, well, Mr. Heinrich had to sit here all day. He did not. I told Mr. Heinrich this morning that there was no chance of getting to him before 1 and suggested
But
that
did
he
you know
leave.
that yesterday? Because he drives quite a far distance to come here, and this is the second
All right.
time he's had to come, Mr.
How would
Prince.
I know it yesterday?
Because you went to
I
the
didn't-
doctor yesterday.
I
Yes,
object
I
to this.
did.
This is,
Mr. Prince, we're here, let's proceed. If you're going to call Mr. Heinrich, let's do it now and try to get through this, please.
Laura, the point I'm making is I'm doing this under protest.
All right, that's duly noted for the record. Is Mr. Heinrich the next witness you would want to call?
Yes, sir,
Of course.
as of cross.
I do.
I'm assuming, and Nate's stepped out, but I'm assuming he's free to go at this point?
I have nothing more for
I
it.
have
All right,
nothing further.
Thank you.
But before Mr. Heinrich,
Let him know. Pardon me?
I am greatly concerned that we're proceeding with 2 of the 3 supervisors when all 3 need to participate in the hearing, and I object to that.
All right, your objection is noted for the record. Mr. Prince, you want to proceed with questioning Mr. Heinrich? Thank you.
How long are we gone, Mr. Fisher?
I'm here till
No,
5.
Yeah, we said 5.
We said 4 o'clock.
Oh, we did?
Did,
I-
yes,
yeah,
we motioned.
Now that it's 4 o'clock.
We said 4 o'clock.
Okay.
I have another hearing.
No, we certainly can't interfere with your hearing.
Yeah, but we did that in advance.
We did. We scheduled that on the 12th.
Mr. Prince, that's totally unnecessary. Do you have any questions of Mr. Heinrich?
I've already told you that, sir, that I do.
Please start
Mr.
questioning him.
Heinrich, did you participate in drafting the section of the Township subdivision and land development ordinance, and particularly the sections on street design, such as 350-31 to 40?
Did you say, did I participate in drafting it?
Yes, sir.
No.
Planning Commission meeting in November of last year, you were asked a question by a board member regarding whether or not the connector road could comply with the Township subdivision ordinance, satisfying the road objections that were raised by LTL. You responded that you did not think it was possible to do so. Is that still your opinion sitting here today?
Repeat the question?
I'm sorry?
Repeat the question?
Why don't you have her do it? Would that be helpful for you?
Planning Commission meeting in November of last year, you were asked a question by a board member regarding whether or not the connector road would comply with the township subdivision requirements subject to objections raised by LTL. You responded you did not think it was possible to do so. Is that
Yeah, my opinion has not changed.
Ask me twice.
Mr. Kaplan, in his November 2018 response to my objections, insists that you directed the location of the connector road. Is that true?
No,
Did you require and insist on the present location of the connector road?
no,
Did you require and insist on the abandonment of the current controlled entrance from Route 322?
are you referring to the existing driveway to BVA?
Yes, sir. Do you want me to repeat that?
Yeah,
Did you require and insist on the abandonment of the current controlled entrance on Route 322?
if I understand your question correctly, no.
In waiver request number 14, which applies to section 350-35, regarding the necessity that the connector road be within 200 feet of opposing Quail Hill Road, Carlino's response is that the waiver is necessary. In your opinion, is it possible? Strike that. Before I proceed, Mr. Heinrich, I know you're a traffic engineer. Can we agree that all of the answers that you give to the technical engineering questions will be to the best of your engineering ability and will constitute your engineering opinion to an answer to the question?
Of course.
Okay. In your opinion, is it possible to design a connector road located within the condemned property, the condemned L&R portion, that would show an outfall opposite Quail Hill Road?
An outfall? Are you referring to stormwater?
No, road, what do you call the road egress when it meets another road?
Intersection?
Yes.
Oh,
Do you
is it,
think it's possible to design a connector road running through the condemned property that intersects with Quail Hill Road?
you haven't given me enough information with which to make that determination. Under the circumstances that I've been presented, I think I would answer no.
As far as you know, with this property and the plan as presented, is it your testimony therefore that you don't think it's possible to redesign that connector road, keeping it within the condemned property, and have it exit at Quail Hill Road?
Again, with the information I have at hand now, you haven't given me enough additional information for me to make that determination.
What is the information you have?
I'm presented with a plan. I'm the reviewer, not the designer. So I work with the information that's presented to me in determining whether the plan is acceptable or not. So you're giving me a separate hypothetical. I have no plans, nothing, and we're talking presumably two-dimensional rather than three-dimensional. It's also a state highway we're dealing with, so I have to rely on
Okay, so you're not
what's
saying,
permittable.
so you're not saying it's impossible to do it. You're saying that absent seeing plans and design for it, I can't say that it could be done. Is that fair?
I can't say whether it's possible or not.
Okay. Would you please turn to Board Exhibit 23, which is your November 5th, 2018
here?
revised?
I'm sorry, start again, I don't know where it's at.
Number 23.
23,
Mr. Heinrich, you also have,
2018
Just 1 second, please.
revised report.
I just wanted to make sure you understood you have the zoning and the saldo there as well, and also the board exhibit binder, if you need it to reference.
I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and they will relate, sit. They will relate to the numbers that appear on the left side of your paragraphs, okay? You follow me?
On the left side of my paragraphs.
Yes, if you look at your review letter of November 5th, you have a paragraph structure, and the numbers for the paragraphs appear on the left side of the
Oh,
paragraph.
for the comments?
Yes.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Okay, so I'm going to use those numbers for purposes of identification of what I want to ask you about. Turning to number 1, You referenced the number of trips generated for the proposed development. Do you see that?
Yes,
Who determined that number?
I calculated that number.
What was the determination based on?
Specifically,
Yes,
what do you mean?
Well,
Square
let me
footage?
ask it this way.
Building square footage.
let me ask you this way. Did you take into consideration the proposed 154 units in the Mapleview development when you calculated the number of trips?
We're talking about comment number 1 in my review letter.
Yes, sir.
This is only specific to the Brandywine Village Center. Has nothing to do with other developments.
Okay, so the trip generation is only trip generation of vehicles entering and exiting the connector road?
No, the shopping center that is proposed, the plan on the board there.
Okay, so those are your trip calculation of vehicles that will be entering the shopping center?
Correct.
And that has nothing to do with the number of residents in the community?
No.
Okay. I want you to look at the alternative transportation plan, which is exhibit B18.
And I did not include the entire plan with that binder,
Oh,
because it was very voluminous. I have it here, I can hand it. So what's in everybody's binders was just the cover letter and the first page of it, because it's very voluminous. Here's the entire document.
Let me ask you this question, maybe it'll expedite things, Mr. Heinrich. You're aware that Mapleview has been approved for 154 residences?
I presume so. I wasn't here for the approval, but
Were you asked to review the plan?
yes,
So you saw the plan?
yes,
So if the plan shows 154 units, you're not going to argue with that, are you?
correct.
And have you reviewed a proposed plan for the development of the senior citizen housing across the street?
I have not yet reviewed it.
So you haven't seen that plan yet?
I have it. I have the plan set. I have not reviewed it.
How many units are proposed in that development?
I don't know offhand.
Objection as to relevance. What is the relevance of either Maplewood or the property across the street in connection with Mr. Heinrich's review of our plans?
Lane
don't get it.
Foundation,
Prince?
Lane Foundation for the next question.
I think he has a right to understand the relevance of those two.
I'm
Develop-
laying foundation for my next question. It has to do with the alternate transportation plan.
Overruled. The objection's overruled. Please proceed.
Do you know how many units are proposed?
No,
You don't have to have that plan with you, do you?
no.
Shouldn't the number of units in Mapleview and in the proposed development across the street, the senior citizen housing, shouldn't those changes, that is to say, the increase in density in those two developments, shouldn't that require a revision of the alternative transportation plan to factor in those significant traffic increases expected in the next 2 years?
I don't see why.
So you think the alternative transportation plan as presented, well, do you have it in front of you there?
Yes,
What's the date of it?
last revised January 20, 2012.
And you don't think that the addition of 154 units next to the shopping center and several hundred units across the street
290
warrants a revision
294.
to a plan that's already 7 years old?
Objection asked and answered.
Sustained. It was asked and answered.
don't believe it is.
He said no.
It's a different question. I'll be happy to have her read back both questions. It's not the same question.
I sustained it.
Yeah, sustained it.
Next question.
Please turn to your comment number 2. There's a joke about this, but I can't tell it like company.
Where are you now? What exhibit?
Do you have that in front of you?
What exhibit?
Yes.
Okay. Now.
Mr.
what-
Prince, which exhibit are you referring to? I'm sorry.
Same exhibit I've been on. It's
No,
not
you
my-
were on the
you-
transportation plan. You were on B18.
Okay.
I'm on his November review letter.
That's all you had to say. You switched to
The
B18.
questions I
What-
said, I was
what-
going to ask him a series of questions about the review letter.
What exhibit is your review letter?
It's
23.
B23.
23.
23, thank you.
Forget the lawyer's asking questions, refer you to it.
Would you turn to number 2, please? And your solution is that the trucks will be controlled, the truck delivery restrictions will be through the lease documents, is that right?
Well, it's not my solution, it's what's proposed.
But you indicated you were satisfied with it.
Yes.
Have you seen the lease that Giant has?
No.
Do you know that lease is dated June 1st, 2010 with one amendment?
I haven't seen it.
How do you know it allows for such a modification?
I'm going by what's on the plan.
So you're assuming that it's allowed?
I'm going by what's on the plan.
Don't you think you should have conditioned that on receiving satisfactory evidence that the modification was allowed under the lease?
Objection, this is really a legal matter. This is not a matter for the traffic engineer. That's something that will end up in our development agreement or in whatever gets recorded.
I think it's relevant in that Mr. Heinrich references it there, so I think the objection's overruled.
What's the question again?
Don't you think you should have conditioned your recommendation on receiving some satisfactory evidence that the modification is in fact allowed?
That I'm supposed to receive that documentation? I don't review those kind of documents. I do have a comment here that the township solicitor may have to review those documents.
Would you look at your comment number 3, please? Now, as I understand your new comment, the original objection, which you have there, is only conditionally satisfied based on some oral promise to modify the right turn entry radius for the driveway curb cut at the rear entrance to BVA at some time in the future, is that right?
Not sometime in the future necessarily, but on these plans.
And isn't it based, as I said, conditionally on an oral promise that it'll be corrected?
I don't know how you use the phrase oral promise. I'm assuming it'll be done on the plan.
Have you received any evidence from the developer evidencing their design of that right turn entry radius to allow tractor-trailer turns?
I have not seen any updated plans since this letter.
You indicated that there's a condition that was satisfied, addressed in the plan. Where's the condition that's satisfied?
Say that again?
You indicated, number 3, that there is a condition that is satisfied. And I'm asking, where is the condition you indicate is satisfied, addressed in the plan? You see your new comment that says satisfied. I'm asking you, where in the plan is that satisfied?
I don't have the plans in front of me. I assume there was something in the plan set that I received.
Mr. Heinrich, the plan is right next to you. Why don't you take a look and tell me
Yeah, but
where
it's
satisfied?
it's not my marked up plan.
Is that your Excuse me, is that his answer, that he doesn't have his marked up plans?
No,
He said, I don't have my marked up
Well, I think-
plans.
I think
it's
to
not
the
the
extent
answer
he can,
to the question.
I think he's looking at the plans. To the extent he can look at those plans and provide an answer, fine. If he can't, he can't.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. Okay.
Second part is.
What reason here? They reviewed this plan. I don't get that.
Everybody knows which sheet the truck turning.
Question.
Chirag knows where the,
Right. You just missed it by one.
What's the question again?
You said that your concern was satisfied, and I asked you to show me where on the plan it was satisfied.
Which number?
3.
Supposed to be satisfied or addressed with whatever more recent plan submissions made.
Well, this is the most recent plan. Can you show me where that objection is
I
satisfied?
don't know that I've reviewed this plan. Is this the?
Mr. Heinrich, the problem I have is your review letter is dated November 5th, revised. And I think the revision was submitted, well, it was submitted subsequent to that because of what it's commenting upon. You say it is satisfied. And I'm just asking you to show me where that satisfaction is on the plan. This plan has not been revised since the date of your review letter.
that's not what his letter says.
Excuse me, Mr. Kaplan. Mr. Kaplan, he's,
Mark, you can ask it on cross. You can ask it on cross. Mr. Heinrich's letter indicates he's reviewed the plan set that's B3, the last revision date of October 16th, 2018.
And he says that the right turning path has been changed, and he says in new comment, it's been satisfied. So I don't know whether he can find it on the plans or not. He said he doesn't have his marked up plans with him.
I understand that, but he reviewed the plans, and I think it's a fair question to ask him to show on these plans where the change was made that he indicates satisfied the comment.
Yes, I don't know that it's something specifically shown on the plan. It's satisfied to my review comment, subject to what else is in the remainder of that response.
I want to make sure I understand your answer. So you're satisfied that they corrected it to meet the objection you had with regard to the right turn, but it doesn't appear on the plan?
But it's supposed to be provided. My comment says that they're supposed to ensure that that is provided.
Have they provided it?
Not yet. I haven't gotten a response back from this, for this letter.
So then that's not satisfied yet.
The comment still requires some additional response.
Okay. Now, moving on to number 4. This is the gem with regard to the compact car spaces around the diamonds. As I read your answer is that they can't be relocated because the diamonds in effect reduce any space on the 4 sides of the diamond. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
Not what I said.
I'm looking at your answer. You're number 4.
Right.
Don't you effectively say they can't be relocated because the diamonds in effect reduce any space on the 4 sides of the diamond?
No, I do not say that. It's my understanding that the Planning Commission required planting islands in the parking field. And so that's the reason these are staying.
Well, your comment says that the code doesn't require planting diamonds. Is it correct that these spaces surrounding the diamonds do not meet the code provision for, as you call it, small car spaces?
That's correct. They're not included in the total count of compact car spaces. My understanding is that they're compact car spaces only because of that cutout on the one corner of the parking space. So they're not perfect 10 by 20 parking spaces.
Okay, so what prevents those 20 spaces that currently surround the diamonds from being removed and relocated to the extremity of the main parking field as you recommended in your original comment?
No, you misunderstand. If these were going to be counted against the compact car space requirement, the compact car space would be moved to the extremities, but they are in effect 10 by 20 spaces, so they don't have to be relocated under those circumstances. It's still a 10 by 20 parking space.
But with the diamonds, and I understand the argument about the diamonds and why the diamonds shouldn't be necessary, et cetera, but the diamonds are there, and the spaces aren't 10 by 20, are they?
They're 10 by 20 with a cutout in a corner. They're not provided with the need to only accommodate a compact car. Any vehicle can use those spaces.
I see. So the distinction, and I just want to, I'm not picking, I want to make sure I understand this. I think you're clarifying something that I don't think was clear before in your letters, or certainly not in my mind. So what you're saying is, your objection is not that these are compact car spaces that are a problem because of the diamonds, but rather that this is just a regular space that's reduced in size because of the diamonds.
In general, that's correct.
So
It's
your
a
position-
it's a full-size space that has a cutout on the corner. So if you're going to leave the tree there and the diamond, it's cut out. There's a small corner, a notch out of each of the 4 spaces around the diamond.
So
They're
then-
not really compact spaces. They're not being counted against the compact space allotment, so they don't have to be removed to the extremities like the compact car spaces that are provided along the
Mr. Hyman,
western
I
property
understand.
line.
That's not what I'm getting at. So as I understand it then, following your analysis, then really section 399-105C on compact cars doesn't matter. I mean, it's not applicable here. It's the wrong section, isn't it?
I don't know the details of the ordinance section you're quoting, but I think you're correct that
one on
they're
compact
not.
cars.
You let him finish?
Mr. Kaplan.
No, you're
Mr. Prince,
interrupting him.
Mr. Kaplan is right. Don't interrupt the answer, please. I don't care if you like the answer or not. Let him finish it.
And is Mr. Kaplan all right in interrupting me?
When you're interrupting the witness, yes, but I admonish both of you not to do it.
The only true compact car spaces are the ones along, I guess it's the western boundary of the property that are going to be signed and used for employees. These are not effectively compact car spaces. They've been called that.
Thank you, I appreciate that, I really, now I understand what you were trying to say. And truthfully, I don't think the planning commission got it either. Let's turn to item 24, if we may. I can't even compliment it. Your comment says, assuming the township still favors construction of Brandywine Village Drive, are you in possession of any documentary evidence that establishes that the township is in favor of the construction of Brandywine Village Drive where it is currently located on the proposed plan?
I believe there was correspondence sent to PennDOT, but I don't have it in my possession.
PennDOT by whom?
I'm sorry?
Sent to PennDOT by whom?
The township, I think Scott Pearsall.
Based on a township resolution? Or
I don't know that for sure. I presume so.
presume, as an assumption, somebody told you something?
Like I said, I think I have correspondence in my file that was sent to PennDOT, but I don't know off the top of my head if there's a resolution attached or not.
And this was correspondence that you think said, and I want to be very precise, that the township wants the road located where it shows in Carlino's plan.
I don't know what the correspondence says. It's a documentation that PennDOT requires.
So it may not have said that.
Like I said, I don't know the exact terminology in the letter.
With regard to the 218 plan in front of us, the one that over there that you were looking at, have you seen any Board of Supervisors resolution specifically approving the location of the connector road at the existing proposed location?
I presume that's part of the land development application, so when the land development is approved, the road will be approved.
I didn't ask you that. I asked you if you have seen any Board of Supervisor resolution heretofore, not as part of the approval of this plan, heretofore, that says that the board approves this specific location of the connector road. The last question I asked you about correspondence, you talked about PennDOT. Now I'm asking you about an actual board resolution.
I don't understand the distinction.
Have you seen any resolution of the Board of Supervisors saying that this road should be located exactly where it appears?
Are you asking that question in conjunction with the letter that went to PennDOT?
No.
So as a separate documentation, I am not aware of one.
Right. Are you aware of any restrictions on building design on the existing Waters commercial tract imposed by the Waters family or anybody else that limits or restricts the design of this development plan for the property?
No.
Are you aware of any recent communication from PennDOT to the township advising that they are not opposed to the entry to Route 322 as shown on the current plan or as was proposed by Mr. Orlando in correspondence to PennDOT that was shared with the township and you?
What document are we talking about?
Yeah, what document?
Mr. Prince, is there a specific document you're referencing?
I believe Mr. Orlando is going to introduce. It was a correspondence from PennDOT that went to, didn't go to Mr. Orlando. Mr. Orlando proposed in correspondence that went to Ms. Camp a location of the road that was an email dated May 14th, which I am going to make an exhibit. Mr. Orlando's email was May 11th. Ms. Camp forwarded the email to the Board of Supervisors, yourself included, and to others, asking for direction with regard to the email. And I'm asking Mr. Heinrich, since he is your traffic engineer, whether or not he's aware of a response from PennDOT indicating that they're happy with Mr. Orlando's location or with the current location. He either is or isn't aware of any such email.
Can you answer it, Mr. Heinrich?
I'm not aware of it at all.
Okay. There is, let me find the number for you. turn to B18, please? The big book. Yeah, not in front of you.
Yep.
If you read to yourself the second paragraph of the August 30, 2018 letter from Anne Marie Vigilante to Scott Pearsall.
Okay.
Now, I just want you to note that there is attached. There's not attached. The exhibit's missing.
I've already stated that.
yeah.
Earlier, when you talked
Sorry,
about this, I
yeah.
said I didn't include the full plan.
Yes, you did.
You have it in
Although
front of
Mr.
me, Mr.
Heinrich
Heinrich
has it.
has
I
it.
do have it, and I can show it to him.
He has
He
it.
has it.
I provided him,
You have it, okay. You see the content of the second paragraph. You've read it to yourself?
Yes.
You see where it says that the township manager at the October 4th, 2010 PennDOT project scoping meeting expressed the acceptance of the improvement and the agreement?
Yes.
And it does say that the ATP was accepted by the township as a result of Mr. Pearsall's representation at that meeting, right?
What it says.
You were at that meeting, right?
I don't know off the top of my head, probably.
9 years ago, 8 years ago.
I don't know about what's in front of you, but I have the ATP.
Yes.
It was bound and submitted. And at the back of it, look at the very last exhibit and see if the notes are there. Ms. Vigilante kept very detailed notes.
I think I have a fuller set than you, where.
I'd like to see what he is showing Mr. Heinrich.
It's not a numbered page, it's listed as exhibit. It's listed in the
The actual
index
alternative transportation plan, I believe.
as,
I don't have,
appendix, I think she
Right behind
refers to
you,
it as
your
appendix
engineer's here.
F.
Mr. Prince, can you wait 1 minute, please? Mr. Kaplan's trying to put his hands on the plan.
Well, let me show you mine.
Mr. Prince, please
Wait
wait.
for a second for Mr. Kaplan to get his hands on his.
You see Pearsall's letter.
No.
I'd like to see whatever it is that you're
Well-
showing.
Mr. Prince, can you,
He is trying to.
Mr. Prince, if you could share what you have with Mr. Kaplan so he can see what you're referring to, please.
Can I hold it myself?
No.
Why?
Because I'd be concerned that we get back the whole thing.
Mr. Prince, I'm asking you to share it with Mr. Kaplan for a moment, and he'll do it in plain view, so we make sure you get the full copy back.
Got it?
Bingo.
No, he asked him about that. No, I know.
Did you find my letter, Scott? Scott, did you find my letter? Which one?
I'll let it open, because that's what they want me to look at.
Oh, okay, is that the draft?
Yeah.
never sent it. She sent it, he prepared a draft, but it's never been, the board has to agree to it. Yeah, so
Okay.
if we can get that somehow. Yeah, there was a draft circulated, but it was never,
Okay.
the board has to sign off on it.
Is what I have full one, because I was,
I think that's what they're
that's what they're looking
looking
at.
for.
Do you have a copy too? No, okay.
Now you have it in front of you?
Yes.
You found it?
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, may I proceed?
You may, please.
Thank you. And did you note Well, I can tell you as an officer of the court, there is a sheet missing that they did not include, because I have it, which is the list of people that attended this meeting. And you'll agree with me, you were clearly at the meeting, because if you look at the fourth bullet, you'll see it references Andy Heinrich stated.
Are you
Oh,
referring
you
to
have
this
that?
sheet?
Okay, it's not in mine. So you were there, right?
There.
Okay. Did Mr. Pearsall at that meeting, insofar as you recall, specifically approve the ATP?
So far as I recall, 8 years ago, I don't recall for
Okay, take-
certain.
Take a minute and read through the notes that were compiled by Carlino's representative, which have been accepted by everybody, and see if you see any of reference to Mr. Pearsall approving the ATP. If it helps, if you look at page 3, second bullet, there is a reference to Mr. Pearsall. My eyes, I think, are older than I am, and I think that's the only reference I saw to Mr. Pearsall, but you're the witness. Please feel free to check it all.
Okay, so what's the question?
Did Mr. Pearsall specifically approve the ATP on behalf of the township?
I believe the sentence you're looking at, and I'll read it, Scott Pearsall stated that the township would agree to allow the connector road be the alternate mitigation to any off-site improvements necessary as a result of the TIS.
So that in and of itself, you agree with me, is not an agreement to accept the ATP. He's expressing what would happen if certain conditions were met. Correct?
If you're asking me, is there a legal document as a result of these meeting minutes, there is none that I'm aware of. Beyond that, the sentence is what it is.
Would you just confirm, look through all the bullets and confirm that nowhere else does a reference to Mr. Pearsall appear?
Would have to be approved.
I think the HOP carries over.
But they never put an
No, they're gonna have to amend the HOP.
right, and so.
But that's
yeah.
always a condition. We never have the HOP at the time of plan approval.
Right.
I can look, but I can make no guarantee.
does not seem to be any other reference to the ATP.
And there is no resolution of the Board of Supervisors attached approving the ATP or authorizing Mr. Pearsall to approve it on behalf of the township, is there?
There wouldn't be at this point in time.
But there is none attached to the document you have in front of you.
As I said, there wouldn't be at this point in time.
At which point in time?
It would come later, like quite recently, when PennDOT has requested it.
Aren't those minutes from a meeting in 2010? I'm confused what minutes that meeting is from.
2010.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, somebody. With respect to this plan, a 2018 plan, the township board will have to approve an alternative transportation plan, correct?
It's already done so.
Okay. Well,
There was a transmittal to PennDOT. I've asked Luke to see.
I don't believe that ever was sent. I think you had requested it. Carlino had requested the township send a letter to PennDOT. I'm not sure it was ever sent, so that needs to be clarified on the record.
Okay.
I know you had asked for it, and I think it was a discussion item among Mr. Pearsall to the
Wasn't
board and
sent.
myself. I don't think it was submitted. I don't think anything has been submitted to PennDOT approving an alternative transportation plan for the 2018 plan.
Therein lies the problem. Now-
But let me ask a question. Is it relevant to a township code section? Okay,
Relevant because of your board exhibit, which says that the township has approved it.
where is that a board exhibit? Where have I made a board exhibit that says we've approved it?
B18,
But that is a Langen letter. That's not a board letter.
it's a board exhibit.
It's a board exhibit, but the board, let me make sure this is very clear. A quote, "board exhibit" means anything that's been submitted to the board with respect to this plan. I'm not saying that what Langen said in this letter is accurate. I'm telling you that Langen submitted this as part of this plan. So please be clear that just because the applicant submitted something, or LTL submitted something, or any of the attorneys submitted something, that's not saying that the board absolutely 100% concurs with everything stated as, just because we mark them as board exhibits. Typically, there's not a hearing process in this. Typically, when you have a land development, the record that I would transmit to the court is everything that gets submitted for this board to consider. And that's why that was marked as an exhibit. I will clarify for the record right now that Mr. Kaplan sent correspondence, I don't know what date, I'm happy to supplement the record, that asked the township to, quote, "approve the alternative transportation plan and send a letter to PennDOT."
Excuse me.
I think, Mr.
Excuse
Prince,
me.
I'm speaking.
Excuse me.
No.
I have the emails and we'll be introducing them.
Okay, but my point is, I can still say that, from my perspective, I don't believe that letter was ever sent. It was something that Mr. Pearsall communicated to the board has never taken it up, and obviously will need to do so at some point in time. If it's not relevant to a code section, I'm not sure it's relevant to whether the plan needs to be approved.
It is,
If it's relevant to whether an HOP can be ultimately issued, that would be a condition of plan approval.
yeah, but this has all the credits for the traffic impact fee included in with it. So that would be, so it is part of our code.
No, it's
included.
not.
There's estimates of the construction.
Alternative transportation plan has nothing to do with
It
the
shows all the
impact
credits
fee.
of the fee, of how the fee was allocated.
Well, the fee, yeah, the fee can be determined.
But the
we would-
fee is determined by the square footage on the retail development.
May I proceed in the hopes of finishing with Mr. Heinrich?
Do.
Yeah,
Thank
go
you.
ahead.
But I think that it should be clear that no letter has been sent to PennDOT approving an alternative transportation plan with respect to the 2018 plan.
Mr. Heinrich, would you please turn to the project overview in the ATP? Would you read the second and third sentences out loud, please?
Second and third sentences.
Yes, of the project overview.
The proposed commercial development will include a 66,276 square foot supermarket, a 4,600 square foot retail building, and a 4,088 square foot bank. Access to the site will be provided via one full access driveway and one right-out only driveway located along Horseshoe Pike, and one full access driveway located along North Guthriesville Road.
Will you agree with me that that is not factually accurate in terms of the plan submitted and pending before us today? Let me make it easy for you. It says 66,276 square feet for the supermarket, correct?
Yes.
The plan in front of me says 56,150, with a potential future expansion of 9,250, for a total of 65,400. Not the same number, is it?
Correct.
I'm going to object on relevance for exactly what the solicitor said. This is an alternative transportation plan that has to be filed with PennDOT. It's got nothing to do with the compliance of this plan with the ordinance.
Mr. Chairman, or Madam Chairman, Madam Solicitor, who's ever answering the questions today at this hour, they submitted this application as part of their plan submission.
No, we did not.
I beg your pardon, I received it from the township as part of the digital submission that was submitted by you. And therefore, I have the right to question it. It's part of their application. What I'm trying to do, and I think it's clear, should be clear to everybody beyond peradventure of a doubt, they've submitted an alternative transportation plan revised January 20th, 2012, that's grossly out of date.
Well, you already asked him the question of whether or not he agreed with that, so he responded to that.
Did you respond?
Yes.
Okay. Now, would you turn to page 6, please? Under description of proposed ATP. And you see where it says the developer is relocating the existing signalized driveway approximately 100 feet to the east per East Brandywine Township's request. That's not accurate either, is it? And if it is, would you please tell me?
Let him answer the question, please, Mr. Prince.
It's a compound question, you don't
No,
let me
it's
finish
not.
it.
You're not asking compound questions. You ask a question, let him answer it.
I believe it was a suggestion by me that precipitated that shift in the driveway.
I didn't ask you that. I asked you, is that
exactly
accurate?
you
What
asked
my response is to your question.
Okay, so please tell me where we will find an authorization of East Brandywine Township that the road has to be moved 100 feet to the east. This road in this plan.
I don't see what relevance that has. Why would
Do
you have?
you have any documentary evidence that the township, with this plan, required the road to be moved, the existing road to be moved 100 feet east?
Required?
Yes.
No.
Okay, moving on. Would you please look at page 7? Legal enforcement of ATP. Would you please look at the second sentence? It says, "The land development plans have received final approval from East Brandywine Township." Have they?
At this point in time, no.
So that's not accurate either, is it?
Nope.
Mr. Prince, we understand that this plan, this alternative transportation plan was filed with with another prior submission. So the legal issue or the engineering issue, whatever it is, for the board to understand is whether or not an alternative transportation plan dated last revision January 20th of 2012 could still be valid for a 2018 plan that has some revisions. That's really the question they have to answer. And they'll be asking Mr. Heinrich for that advice.
I would also point out that the
I-
permit has not been issued yet.
I have an obligation on behalf of my client to point out deficiencies in the application. This is part of the application. I agree with you. If I had been the attorney for the developer, I never would have submitted a 2012 plan, alternative transportation plan, to satisfy a 2018 plan.
Okay.
But I'm not the developer.
Right.
Ask,
So
you
it
have
is
another
what it
question?
is.
Mr. Prince, you have another question?
Yes, I do. Thanks.
Not as part of the land development, as part of the HOP. Yeah.
Would you look at page 7? It actually is page 8, but look at the bottom of page 7, just so you see the heading. Evidence of stakeholder concurrence. Do you see that?
Yes?
Now go to the next page, please. Top of the page.
Yes?
Would you read to yourself what it says, starting with this alternative?
Okay.
That's not accurate either, is it?
What's it say?
Do you want me to read it? I thought we
Well,
weren't
since we
reading
don't
these
have the
things.
complete plan in
I
front
gotta
of
know
us.
what he's talking
Yeah.
about.
In
It
most
reads,
cases,
"This alternative improvement was agreed upon by PennDOT and the township during the scoping meeting held at PennDOT's office on 28 September 2010. A copy of both the resolution and the PennDOT scoping meeting minutes have been included in Appendix F." And that's not accurate, is it?
If you're asking, is there a formal document to that effect? then
Yes.
You're probably correct, but an agreement could have been part of that.
Do you know of a written agreement?
I just said, if you're asking for a written agreement, I said no.
Okay. Have you ever seen PennDOT authorize or do anything without a written document?
The agreement was so that the applicant could proceed with planning and the plans and the formal documentation. There wasn't even a highway occupancy permit application at the time of those scoping meetings.
Now, Mr. Heinrich, I want to get into these emails.
I'd like to object to this line of testimony. This is all, what is being questioned here is an alternative traffic plan that's part of the PennDOT Highway Occupancy Permit
15.
Plan review. It is not part of the township's land development process. It is only that PennDOT requires the township in a situation like this to concur. So what's in that plan is not relevant to what we're doing here.
I would tend to agree. Mr. Prince, how is it relevant to a code section in the East Brandywine Township Code?
sorry.
Madam, it is a portion of an application that was submitted that addresses the resolution of transportation issues, many of which are covered by your ordinances. It doesn't matter who it was intended to be submitted for. It's part of your requirements, and they submitted it. And so I had to
No,
write
but
the
I'm asking,
question.
but I don't understand, and maybe it's Mr. Heinrich that has to answer. Is there any township code section that requires an alternative transportation plan? Or is that purely a PennDOT requirement?
Purely a PennDOT
Okay,
requirement.
so I'd have to agree with Mr. Kaplan that they submitted it, yes, because they submit, the township requires to be copied on anything that gets submitted to PennDOT. But if it's not relevant to a code section, and this board right here is not the board that's going to issue an HOP, I don't think this line of questioning is relevant.
Ms. Camp, the email I have just submitted to you and asked that you mark BVA 15 is written by you, and it clearly says, "I met with Andy and Scott last week to discuss the Carlino plans and Andy's review of same. We discussed Andy writing a letter accepting the alternative transportation plan. Andy is in the process of reviewing the plans, and as part of his review, can provide his comment on that. It is part of his review."
Okay, you're right.
Okay,
He did.
thank
He
you.
included that in his review letter, that he indicated that he had no objection to it, but ultimately it was the board's decision. But it's relevant to PennDOT's HOP, not a code section of the township code. Are you marking this as an exhibit?
Yes,
What is it?
I think it's 15.
15.
Would you please read that to yourself? You don't need to read it out loud.
I have.
Now, it references a meeting you were going to have about the ATP. Is that the ATP we've been talking about?
Yes,
Did you in fact write such a letter?
I drafted a letter.
Do you have that draft with you?
No.
Would you please produce that draft? You can email it to us,
I can provide it with the board if we provide it.
provide it to the board. The board can provide it to
Mr.
us.
Prince, I'm going to instruct him not to do that. We're not going to
I would
produce
like
a
to see it.
draft letter. You can see it. That's a difference between putting it into this proceeding. You have another question?
Yes, another email.
Just so that I'm clear, there was a draft, but that no letter has been sent. Is that right, Mr.
That's
Ryan?
correct.
Thank you.
The
Well,
letter has been
just to
sent.
be clear, Gene,
I just wanted to-
Gene, just to be clear, Andy's review letter that Paul was questioning him about before.
No, I know, I see that paragraph.
Essentially give a approval to the
But-
ATP.
That's your interpretation. I seen his letter.
Okay.
We don't have to disagree.
I think we
Yeah,
got
I-
off all the stuff on the ATP and just move on.
That's 16. 16. Now, Mr. Henrich, this email says that there was another discussion with you and with Mr. Pearsall, and that you're going to be providing a recommendation to the board, correct?
I'm not sure if this is a separate discussion or the same one. I believe it's the same discussion that Kristen is referring to.
Okay. And this was precipitated by Mr. Kaplan's email that appears right below it, dated September 19th at 2:10 PM, requesting the letter?
Well, this email was precipitated
Yes.
by it, I guess.
Mr. Prince, I think your point is taken, that, I mean, we don't need to go into any more about the ATP.
We're not.
Okay.
Now, just before we leave the ATP, Mr. Heinrich, I just want to make sure that you haven't changed your opinion. Your answer to your revised review comment 24 said that you were satisfied with the ATP. Now, having reviewed this ATP and all the deficiencies, are you still satisfied with that ATP?
Yes.
Okay. You have in front of you an email dated May 14th from Ms. Clamp to you, among others, and it's forwarding Mr. Orlando's May 11th email. And that email was about a forthcoming meeting that was to be held with PennDOT, correct?
Seems to be.
Would you please take a minute and read the third paragraph that references moving the road 65 feet?
Okay.
Do you have any engineering objection to the change in the road location proposed by Mr. Orlando in that letter?
Subject to seeing an engineered design of it, perhaps not.
There is an email out there, I have it, but I don't necessarily need to introduce it. It references an email from you asking to see Carlino's Alt 1 plan. Why in September of 2018 did you want to see Carlino's Alt 1 plan?
When was that?
The exact date was...
Of last year? I don't have a recollection of it.
Never ask witnesses questions they don't know the answer to. That is the plan that Mr. Pearsall said you were interested in. Does that jog your memory?
No.
Okay, thank you. Returning to that ATP, would you go back to Exhibit F, the meeting minutes?
Yes.
On the bottom of the first page, there is a bullet for a statement by John Otten. Can you tell the panel who John Otten is? John Otten?
He's an engineer out at PennDOT, generally handles HOPs for Chester County.
Okay. Would you read the bullet out loud, please?
John Otten questioned the alignment of the Guthriesville Road driveway and whether it should be located across from Quail Hill Road. Mark Kaplan stated that the driveway could not be located across from Quail Hill Road due to existing wetlands in the area. Al Federico questioned whether there would be an issue with overlapping left turns. Anne-Marie Vigilante stated that those left turning volumes will be low and should not be a concern.
Mr. Carlino, excuse me, Mr. Kaplan, on behalf of Carlino Development, submitted a wetlands plan as part of this application. Did you perchance read or see the wetlands report that was submitted?
I may have received it, but I have not reviewed it in any
Okay.
fashion.
I want to show you another one of these pages from the plan. It's drawing 2100, sheet 7 of 34. Maybe I want 2101. Is it easier for you to look at it there?
Depends on your question.
I'm going to ask you about up here, Quail Hill Road.
What sheet, Paul?
2101.
Is that sheet 8 of 34?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's the sheet labeled Post-Construction Stormwater Management Grading Plan. Would you please look at the area opposite Quail Hill Road? Now, this is labeled Quail Hill Road, so we can agree that's Quail Hill Road?
Quail Hill Lane.
Quail Hill Lane, forgive me. Do you see any wetlands labeled there opposite Quail Hill Lane?
Wetlands in general in this area, I don't know what area is constituted by that.
But that's not opposite Quail Hill Lane, is it?
I don't know the extent of it, so I can't answer the question.
Well, the extent is actually laid out there. Do you
Mr.
see the
Prince, he
boundary
said
lines for
he
the
doesn't
wetlands?
know,
I'm
so.
showing them to him. It's on the plan. Do you see the boundary of the wetlands?
No, I do not. I just see contours.
Do you see this line right there? And that line right there?
Not a wetlands engineer.
Inside it says wetlands, square feet, 3,004. Want my glasses?
No, I can see it. I'm just reading the extent of it all the way around. Okay, that could be it.
Well, let's do it the simpler way. You see the detention basin?
Yes.
And you see the detention basin has a berm that runs down right to the road?
Yes,
Right opposite Quail Hill Road, right?
correct.
So if it were wetlands, it's being violated as part of the plan by the construction of a detention basin and berm, right?
Objection. He's not the wetlands expert. I let it go and I let it go. I object to him asking this traffic engineer about wetlands questions.
Well, Mr. Kaplan isn't either, and the objection that he voiced to PennDOT was, oh, no, we can't do that, there's wetlands there. This is their plan. It shows no wetlands opposite Quail Hill Lane. It's on the plan. I asked the board to take notice of it when they review the plan.
Here we go, we're back to a 2010 meeting.
That's not the point.
Objection sustained. Do you have another question for Mr. Heinrich?
I do. In the absence of that being wetlands, do you see any other objection that prevents that line up with Quail Hill Road as Mr. Otten from PennDOT indicated he desired?
Do I see any, what was the word you used?
Other reason that the plan couldn't show a road that ended opposite Quail Hill Road?
I'm
Well,
going to object to this line of questioning. What does the location of the road in the location where it is now have to do with whether or not our plan complies?
You asked for
Well,
waivers.
be- yeah, sorry, yes. So it's overruled. Can you answer the question?
On two dimensions, I don't see how you get through the property and out. Your question is focused on a small piece of the property along Guthriesville. You have to show me the entire alignment out to 322.
So if I showed you the entire alignment to 322 and it could be done, you would be satisfied with that?
I didn't say that. I would have to see that before I could say yes or no.
Okay. The only objection that Mr. Kaplan raised in the meeting at PennDOT that's attached to the ATP with that issue was wetlands. If that's removed, let me ask you this. Have you received any correspondence in the last year from Mr. Haney or anyone else at PennDOT renewing their interest in the road ending opposite Quail Hill Road?
No.
Are you aware of any recent communication from PennDOT to the township advising that the alignment with Quail Hill Road would be desirable?
No.
So if the township received it, they didn't share it with you?
I don't know.
We up to BVA 16?
No, we're up to 18.
We're at 18, but when are you marking?
The April 11th email from Mr. Haney.
Do you have copies for us?
18.
Thank you.
Can you leave copies of everything for Mr. Scribner as well, please? We'll have to give him a copy. Prior to the plans being submitted, plans are submitted in July.
So, Mr. Heinrich, you did not receive,
Let me look at this first.
Mr. Heinrich, you didn't receive a copy of this,
Apparently I did.
but you don't remember it.
No.
And didn't Mr. Haney indicate that he found that intriguing and perhaps it should be better aligned?
Objection, hearsay. Fran Henny's not here, so I can cross-examine him.
Speaks for
Yeah,
itself.
I mean,
Well, Mr. Orlando had asked for a subpoena for him, so.
we don't,
I
we've
know,
already
we don't issue
articulated, we don't believe
subpoenas.
we have the subpoena power, but, I mean,
Scott Pearsall was here, it was sent to him.
It's hearsay. He's saying that Fran Henny said something. Well,
I think-
if this is being submitted for the truth of that, then I have the right to cross-examine Fran Haney, and he does not have the right to introduce
for what
this
it's worth.
document, which is
It's-
hearsay.
It's being
Overruled.
submitted, it's not being
Letters
submitted for the
overruled.
truth.
Right, the letters are ruled. It can speak, the board can give whatever weight it determines is appropriate.
Correct. Did you have a chance to read Mr. Henny's comments?
Yes.
And of course, since he's addressing in the subject, the main entrance at Route 322, when he refers to the other end as intriguing, he's referring to North Guthriesville Road, isn't he?
That's what it appears to be.
And that's in April of 2018, correct?
Yes.
From your point of view, as the engineer, traffic engineer for this township, if PennDOT expresses an interest in an intersection that is in fact a state road, does that carry some weight or influence on you?
Objection, same thing. What's the relevance of this to our application?
Obviously, they've asked him to give an opinion on the road, et cetera. He never saw this. He said this is the first he
Yeah, I do
was
too.
aware.
Overruled. You can answer.
That
Mr.
carries
Honor.
some influence or weight with you?
It's a state highway, they decide.
Okay. Now, I have one more email I'm going to show you.
All of this goes to the HOP, not to the question of our ordinance, which does require that if it's within 200 feet of your home.
He asked for a waiver.
Well, and he got a ton of evidence from
Sure.
on that issue,
Exactly.
on the alignment,
Yeah.
wouldn't make sense.
You can't do it. I agree. He said that you could do it, but then it makes other sections of the ordinance, you can't comply with all the sections.
We're going to go on to the second page.
Thank you.
Did you leave one for Kyle?
Yes,
Sorry, Paul, which one is this?
19.
Yes, but which email?
Email from Scott Pearsall to Mr. Heinrich dated October 16th, 2018.
Correct.
Yeah, I only have one.
I know you do. I have yours here. My printer went wild, and most of them it did not duplicate properly. Have you had a chance to look at the second page?
Briefly,
Well, take a minute and look at your answer in red at the top of the second page, and I'm going to ask you to read it into the record.
the comment number 1.
Yes, the top of the second page.
The location of the signalized intersection along 322 was my suggestion, not a requirement, which was made at the time access to the Weaver Tract / Hovnanian development across the street was eliminated, parentheses. Access to the Weaver Tract has been shown aligned opposite the existing location of the signal, close parentheses. The suggestion was made in part because of the concerns about access to the bank pad, which was initially shown on the opposite side of Brandywine Village Drive. The suggestion was made so that the bank pad could be moved elsewhere or flipped to the other side of Brandywine Village Drive to eliminate the access concerns. The location for the signalized access was never a requirement of the township, just a suggestion once the Weaver Tract development went away, thus allowing for the shifting of the signal location to better fit the situation along the 322 corridor.
Okay, thank you. Just give me a minute, I'm going to go back to my seat. I don't have any more emails for you. Mr. Heinrich, I want to now turn to your December 7th I believe you said we were adjourning at 4.
How many more questions do you have, Mr.?
Number. I cannot possibly finish.
And I would like to also, while we're about to talk schedules, I requested, in a right-to-know request on December 26th, Township and PennDOT communications. They have not yet been produced. The Right to Know officer, I believe, is working on them.
Mr.
In light
Orlando,
of-
can I ask you a question about that? 'Cause
Wait, let
you-
me finish my statement,
Yeah, but you're-
please. In light of Mr. Heinrich's testimony that he believes there is communication relevant to questions asked, I'm asking that the township do what it can to accelerate receipt of those right-to-know requests, so that when Mr. Heinrich comes back, I can ask him to confirm what he has alluded to might be the case with regard to Township and PennDOT communication.
Mr. Orlando, are you aware that your right-to-know request was not specific to this application? It was for every communication that the township had with anything relating to PennDOT for a period of 3 years?
From January 1, 2016 to date.
Correct. It's 3 full years, and it's for every communication relating to PennDOT. Was it your intention to have it be specific to Carlino? Because that would narrow the search and narrow the time that township staff and my office have to spend on responding.
That was not my understanding of what the content was, but my associate Chris Carroll did it.
Right, and it had no reference to the Carlino development.
I will get back to you before 9 a.m. tomorrow morning
Thank you.
and clarify that.
Thank you. We can only work so fast. There's many other things that the township staff has to do and that my office has to do. It's not just this case. So it truly takes 30 days. And Luke is here. He's very involved in it. So if you can limit it, we can probably do our best to try to get the documents. But I also note that PennDOT is a public agency that is required to comply with the right-to-know law. This plan was filed in July. So you've had since July to make requests of PennDOT for documents you believe are relevant for this board to consider. So we'll do our best.
Where's, Mr. Heinrich, we're scheduled, I think, on the 22nd.
Tuesday.
At 9 a.m. Are you available then, do you know?
I
thought it
think
was
we
at
actually
8.
said 8.
8? Okay, good.
When is it?
Oh,
22nd.
not good.
We
Took
scheduled
me an hour
it.
and a half to get here this morning.
Should be 9.
Well, we're trying to do all we can to get this done, and we're dealing with the
'Cause
board's
I
schedules.
think we did have a time limit
We
on
did,
the
we said
26th.
8 to
I
2,
have
though.
a 4 o'clock hearing in Concord.
And that's why we said 8 to 2 on the 22nd.
Are you available at 8 on the 22nd? All right.
Well, I'm not available at 8. I can be
Well,
here
that
at
was the
9.
time we scheduled the last time.
Well, I know that, but you're asking for convenience of everybody else. Mr. Chairman,
I'm-
it takes me an hour to get here.
I'm asking Mr. Heinrich, because he is the witness on the stand, you were given notice of it being 8 to 2 weeks ago, back in December, when we arrived at this schedule, so,
So in the future, then, I should make objection immediately upon the notification?
when we all agree on a date and a time, yes, if you can't make it, you should tell us at that time. We got concurrence from everybody.
I hear you.
All right, we'll adjourn today until the 22nd at 8 a.m. Thank you.